They taught you that being alone is a punishment, a failure, a sign that something went wrong. They taught you that silence means rejection, that empty rooms mean you were not chosen, that if no one is calling your name, you must be missing something essential. That story was never meant to protect you. It was meant to shape you. Because what if the thing you've been running from your entire life is not your downfall, but your refinement? What if isolation is not the scar you need to heal, but the furnace where something stronger is meant to be forged? Consider this carefully. Loneliness hurts not because it destroys you, but because it strips away everything that distracted you from yourself. And most people cannot survive that stripping. Niccolò Machiavelli spent decades watching men chase power and lose it. Princes surrounded by armies, nobles drowning in alliances, merchants backed by entire networks of loyalty. And yet, over time, he noticed a pattern that almost no one wanted to acknowledge. The men who held power the longest were not the most connected. They were not the most loved. They were not the most surrounded. They were the ones who could stand alone, without collapsing under the weight of their own thoughts. That is not coincidence. That is architecture. There is a reason society wants you constantly connected. There is a reason you are warned that isolation is dangerous, that you need community, that you need validation, that you need to belong. Because a person who can stand alone cannot be easily influenced, cannot be easily shamed, and cannot be easily controlled. Dependency is leverage. Independence is threat. Today, you are going to see what Machiavelli, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche understood about solitude. Truths so destabilizing that they were buried beneath centuries of social conditioning. You will understand why the crowd instinctively fears the individual who walks alone. You will see the hidden structure of isolation as a strategic position, not a defect. And by the end, you will no longer view your loneliness as a weakness, but as an advantage so rare that most people will never be psychologically capable of accessing it. But understand this clearly. This knowledge has a cost. Once you see what is being revealed, you cannot return to the comforting illusion. That connection is always good, and solitude is always bad. There is no way back to that innocence. Now let us begin properly. In the 18th law of the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene presents a principle that appears, at first glance, to contradict everything you have just heard. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. Most people stop there, and most people misunderstand it. Greene is not condemning solitude. He is condemning fear-based isolation. There is a profound difference between retreat born of weakness and withdrawal chosen from strength. That distinction separates rulers from victims. When a leader builds walls because he fears the world, those walls do not protect him. They entomb him. History makes this painfully clear. Louis XVI withdrew into the insulated luxury of Versailles while his nation starved. He surrounded himself with flatterers and yes-men. He severed his connection to reality itself. And when the consequences arrived, those golden walls offered no salvation. But there exists another kind of isolation entirely. The isolation practiced by Marcus Aurelius, who wrote Meditations alone in military tents, surrounded not by comfort, but by war, decay, and death. The isolation practiced by Machiavelli himself, exiled from Florence, tortured, disgraced, stripped of position, influence, and identity. He was not hiding from the world. He was distilling it. He wrote not from fear, but from fury, from clarity, from a place where he had nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing left to lose, nothing remains to distort your perception. This is the dividing line. The weak man builds a fortress to escape reality. The strong man builds a laboratory to understand it. Ask yourself honestly, which one are you building? You were conditioned from childhood to fear being alone. Look at the stories you were fed. The lone wolf is dangerous, immoral, evil. The sheep that leaves the flock is devoured. The hero is never alone. He's always backed by companions, allies, a fellowship. Isolation is framed as damage, as villainy, as failure. This is not accidental. Societies function on compliance. Economies function on consumption. Both require you to care deeply about what others think. Both require you to seek external approval. Both require you to fear exclusion more than dishonesty. If you become comfortable alone, something dangerous happens. You stop buying things to impress people you don't respect. You stop performing identities designed for applause. You stop being a predictable unit in a machine built on comparison and insecurity. Arthur Schopenhauer saw through this centuries ago. He wrote that the person who genuinely enjoys solitude possesses something exceptionally rare, a self that is sufficient unto itself. But society cannot tolerate that. A self-sufficient individual is an economic liability, an emotional anomaly, a threat to systems built on manufactured need. So instead they pathologize you. They label it social anxiety, attachment disorders, avoidant personality traits, clinical names for what may simply be a mind that does not require constant stimulation from the herd. This is not a denial of real psychological suffering, but it is an invitation to question something deeper. How much of your loneliness is genuine pain, and how much of it is manufactured shame? The real question is not, why am I alone? The real question is, who benefits when I believe being alone is wrong? Here is what strategists have always understood, and the average person never will. Solitude is the birthplace of original thought. Nietzsche climbed alone into the Swiss Alps. He walked for hours in silence, his mind igniting with ideas that would fracture philosophy itself. Thus Spoke Zarathustra was not written in salons. It was not written among peers. It was written in isolation so severe that most people would have collapsed under its weight. Nietzsche did not collapse. He transformed. The higher we soar, he wrote, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. This is not arrogance. It is observation. When you begin thinking thoughts not borrowed from consensus, not validated by group approval, you become invisible to those who can only see through collective eyes. And that invisibility is not a loss. It is your strategic advantage. When you are truly alone, without distraction, without noise, something subtle but irreversible begins to occur. Your mind stops echoing the opinions of others. Your reactions stop being automatic responses to social pressure. And slowly, perhaps for the first time since childhood, you begin to hear your own voice. Before you go any further, you must understand this distinction clearly, because confusing it has ruined more lives than ignorance ever did. Not all isolation is strength, and not all solitude leads to power. There are two forms of being alone. From the outside, they look identical. From the inside, they are opposites. One is decay, the other is dominance. The first is fear-based isolation. This is the withdrawal of the wounded, the retreat of someone who feels inferior, rejected, or unworthy. This form of isolation is not chosen, it is endured. The person withdraws because the world feels hostile, because exposure feels dangerous, because interaction threatens their fragile self-image. This kind of isolation does not clarify the mind, it corrodes it. The individual does not grow quieter, they grow smaller. They replay conversations that never happened. They imagine judgments that were never spoken. They turn solitude into a courtroom where they are always on trial. This is not strength. This is erosion, and Machiavelli warned against exactly this. When Robert Greene writes that isolation is dangerous, this is what he is describing. The fortress built out of fear, the walls raised to hide weakness, the retreat that comes from shrinking, not positioning. This isolation blinds you. It cuts you off from reality. It traps you inside distorted perceptions. The mind, when isolated without strength, turns against itself. But there is another form, strategic isolation. This is not a reaction, it is a decision. The individual who practices strategic isolation does not hate people. They do not fear society. They simply understand something fundamental. Proximity destroys perspective. When you are constantly surrounded by others, you lose the ability to see clearly. Your thoughts become reactive. Your priorities become negotiable. Your identity becomes porous. Strategic isolation restores distance, and distance restores vision. This is why the most dangerous thinkers, the most enduring leaders, and the most original minds have all passed through long periods of voluntary solitude. Machiavelli did not isolate himself because he was broken. He isolated himself because the noise was distorting his judgment. Exile removed the incentive to lie, removed the need to perform, removed the pressure to belong. And in that vacuum, clarity emerged. This is the isolation of the strategist, not the coward. Now understand this next point, because it explains why people will resist your withdrawal. When you begin to pull back, when you become less available, less reactive, less eager to engage, people will not respond with curiosity. They will respond with hostility. They will say, you have changed. They will accuse you of arrogance. They will question your motives. They will attempt to provoke explanations. This is not concern. It is panic. Your withdrawal destabilizes the group. Every social system depends on predictable participation. Roles must be filled. Energy must circulate. When you step out of that flow, you expose how fragile it really is. Your silence becomes an interruption, Your absence becomes a question, and questions are dangerous. Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. The herd does not punish the individual through force. It punishes through ridicule, through moral judgment, through quiet exclusion. Not because the individual is wrong, but because they represent a possibility the herd cannot tolerate. The possibility that life does not require consensus, that identity does not require validation, that meaning can be constructed internally. This is why the solitary individual is framed as broken, antisocial, or unstable. Not because they are, but because they are uncontrollable. Now let us speak about power in practical terms. Machiavelli observed a particular type of ruler who always failed, the one who needed too many allies. A ruler who cannot stand alone is not forming alliances out of choice, but out of necessity, and necessity destroys leverage. When people sense that you need them, the power dynamic shifts instantly. They test boundaries, they take liberties, they offer less while demanding more. This applies everywhere. Friendships, romantic relationships, business partnerships. The individual who fears being alone will tolerate disrespect they should never accept. They will remain in relationships that slowly poison them. They will maintain proximity to people who barely conceal their contempt. They will laugh at insults. They will agree to unfair terms. They will reshape themselves to remain included, or because the alternative, being alone, feels like annihilation. But here is the paradox that most people never grasp. The capacity to be alone is the foundation of every strong connection. When you can walk away, truly walk away, without collapsing, everything changes. You stop negotiating from weakness. You stop accepting fragments. You stop begging for reciprocity. You relate from completeness rather than hunger. And paradoxically, this makes people want you more, not because you are manipulating them, but because you are no longer grasping. Presence without need is magnetic. Annalee Rufus wrote about this in Party of One. Those who are comfortable in solitude often form deeper, more authentic connections, precisely because they are not desperate for them. The needy repel, the self-contained attract. This is not psychology as advice, it is physics. Neediness is repulsion. Self-sufficiency is gravity. Now we arrive at a critical strategy, one Machiavelli would have recognized immediately: the strategic retreat. When most people feel their position weakening, socially, professionally, romantically, they panic. They talk more. They chase harder. They explain themselves endlessly. They attempt to prove value through overexposure. And with every attempt, their position erodes further. The Machiavellian does the opposite. They withdraw, not with hostility, not with dramatic announcements, not with silence designed to provoke. They simply become less available, less visible, less eager. When Machiavelli was dismissed and exiled in 1512, he did not beg for reinstatement. He did not flood the Medici with letters. He did not perform loyalty. He retreated. He worked. He wrote. And the ideas forged in that exile outlived every political figure who dismissed him. When you retreat strategically, three things occur. First, you reclaim your attention. The energy you were bleeding into people who did not value you returns to you. This alone is transformative. Second, you regain perspective. Entanglement blinds. Distance clarifies. You begin to see relationships as they are, not as you hoped they would be. Third, you activate a primitive psychological mechanism. Scarcity creates value. When you withdraw without resentment, without explanation, without need, others are forced to confront what they may have taken for granted. But this only works if the retreat is genuine. If you are watching your phone, counting hours, hoping for a response, you are not retreating. You are performing withdrawal while remaining enslaved internally. True strategic isolation requires internal disengagement. Your focus must shift fully to your own development, your own work, your own trajectory. Their absence must become background noise, not the main event. This is difficult, and difficulty is the filter. It separates those who will use these principles from those who will merely admire them intellectually. Arthur Schopenhauer was brutally honest about this. He observed that most human social interaction is not genuine connection. It is distraction from the unbearable weight of the self. People who cannot tolerate solitude are fleeing something inside themselves, and no amount of social activity will resolve that. It can only postpone it. This is why individuals who rely heavily on external stimulation often collapse when isolated. They have never developed an inner world. Their identity depends entirely on feedback. Remove the feedback, and they experience something close to ego death. But those who have cultivated solitude, who have sat with themselves in silence and survived, possess something rare: a self that is not contingent, an identity that does not require witnesses. Schopenhauer called this intellectual wealth, the ability to inhabit your own mind, without panic, without boredom, without collapse. This is not arrogance, it is psychological independence, and it terrifies those who do not have it. Because when they encounter you, they see a mirror reflecting their own dependency. They see someone who escaped a prison they did not even know existed. There is a truth most people never reach, not because it is hidden, but because it demands a level of honesty few are willing to tolerate. Solitude does not automatically make you stronger. It exposes you, and exposure is dangerous. If you are not prepared for what you will find, many enter isolation thinking they will discover peace. What they encounter instead is confrontation. Without the noise of others, without constant feedback, without distraction, you come face to face with yourself. Not the version you present to the world, but the version you avoid. This is why most people flee back to the crowd before the transformation can begin. But if you stay, if you do not numb yourself, if you do not escape, something irreversible starts to occur. This is what I call transmutation, the conversion of loneliness from weakness into sovereignty. The first stage is acknowledgement. You must stop treating your solitude as a problem to solve or a defect to correct. Your isolation is not a symptom. It is raw material. Every hour you spend alone is an hour uncontaminated by expectations, projections, and borrowed identities. This is extraordinarily rare. Most people live their entire lives without experiencing a single day of genuine psychological independence. Their opinions are inherited. Their desires are manufactured. Their identities are composites they never consciously chose. But in solitude, you have access to something they do not, an unfiltered relationship with your own mind. The second stage is excavation. When the distractions fall away, you begin to encounter parts of yourself you have spent years suppressing. Fear you never admitted, anger you disguised as politeness, desires you buried under morality, ambition you were told was selfish. This stage is painful. It dismantles the lie that you are purely rational, purely good, purely controlled. Most people retreat here. They run back to noise, back to stimulation, back to social performance. Because excavation threatens the image they worked so hard to maintain. But Machiavelli understood something essential. A leader who does not know his own weaknesses will be destroyed by them. Self-knowledge is not optional. It is a strategic necessity. And self-knowledge is only available to those who can sit in the dark long enough to see what is there. The third stage is integration. This is where power is born. You take what you uncover. The fear, the resentment, the hunger for control, the capacity for ruthlessness, and you bring it into consciousness. You stop pretending to be only light. You accept the darkness, and therefore gain authority over it. Carl Jung later called this shadow integration. Machiavelli practiced it centuries earlier, without sentimentality. He did not deny the brutal aspects of human nature. He studied them, accepted them, and therefore could wield them. Instead of being ruled by them, what you deny controls you. What you integrate serves you. The fourth stage is construction. At this point, something most people never possess emerges. A foundation, not built on approval, not built on belonging, not built on reaction, but built on internal coherence. From this foundation, you can begin to build deliberately, not according to social expectation, not according to trends, not according to what earns applause. You build according to your own architecture. This is sovereignty. A sovereign is not someone who dominates others. A sovereign is someone who governs themselves. Their authority is internal. Their throne is psychological. And because their power does not depend on external validation, no external circumstance can truly dethrone them. This is what solitude can give you, if you are willing to endure it. History offers brutal proof. In 1302, Dante Alighieri was exiled from Florence, banished under threat of death should he return. He lost his position, his property, his home. He wandered Italy for the rest of his life. Most men would have disintegrated. Dante transmuted his exile into the Divine Comedy, one of the most enduring works ever created. His descent into hell, his climb through purgatory, his ascent into paradise, was not mere allegory. It was autobiography. Exile was not his punishment. It was his liberation. Had he remained in Florence, absorbed in politics and performance, he would have vanished into obscurity. Isolation freed his genius. The same pattern repeats. Seneca, exiled by Nero, used his isolation to refine Stoic philosophy that would outlast the empire that condemned him. Henry David Thoreau withdrew to Walden Pond, not to escape life, but to strip it down to what was essential. Solitude was not exile, it was emancipation. These men were not destroyed by isolation, they were forged by it. Now let us speak practically. How do you weaponize solitude without letting it corrode you? First, structure. Unstructured isolation degenerates into rumination, the same thoughts looping endlessly. This is destructive. Productive solitude requires architecture, rituals, discipline, boundaries. Machiavelli worked the land by day. At night, he dressed as if entering court and engaged with the great minds of history. This ritual preserved his identity as a strategist, even when the world tried to erase it. Your rituals serve the same function. They maintain who you are becoming, even when no one is watching. Second, intellectual companionship. You may be physically alone, but you need not be intellectually isolated. Books are conversations across centuries. When you read Machiavelli, Marcus Aurelius, Schopenhauer, you are in dialogue with minds that endured what you are enduring. This is not a replacement for human connection. It is a different form of connection, one that cannot be taken from you. Third, evidence of progress. Without external feedback, growth can feel invisible. Counter this by recording it. Write, track, build, create proof that you are advancing. Not for others, for yourself. When you eventually re-enter social space, and you will not return with explanations. You will return with results. Fourth, strategic reemergence. Solitude is a phase, not a permanent sentence. The monk returns from the mountain. The strategist returns to the board. But when you return, you do not seek validation. You offer perspective. People will sense the difference immediately. You will carry weight without announcing it. Here is the truth no one will tell you directly. Some individuals are meant to walk alone. Not forever, not completely, but essentially, they are not broken. They are not damaged. They are not missing something others have. They are built for different conditions. Just as certain organisms thrive where others perish. Your wiring is different, and no amount of forcing yourself into perpetual social immersion will change that. Schopenhauer wrote that ordinary people think only of how to pass time. A person of depth thinks of how to use it. Perhaps you are not lonely. Perhaps you are simply using time in a way the crowd cannot tolerate. This does not mean isolation is always healthy. There is pathological withdrawal, fear-based hiding, but there is also sovereign solitude, the deliberate positioning of someone who has work to do that the crowd would only interrupt. You must answer honestly. Are you hiding, or are you preparing? If you are hiding from life, that is a wound to heal. But if you are alone, because you have found something in silence that does not exist in noise, then you are not sick, you are awakening. The world will tell you that you are wrong. It will insist that connection is everything, and isolation is death. It will label you, medicate you, ridicule you, ignore it. They do not understand what you have access to. They cannot comprehend the forge you are building within. They are speaking from their terror of silence, a terror you're learning to outgrow. So where does this leave you? Alone. Perhaps tonight, perhaps for a while longer. But now, instead of treating that solitude as something to escape, you can see it as territory to explore, a laboratory to experiment within, a forge to shape yourself. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. Isolation burns away everything that was never truly you, the borrowed identities, the performed personalities, the inherited opinions. What remains is essential. And from that essence, you will build something that does not require applause to stand, something immune to rejection, something sovereign. Machiavelli did not write The Prince to be loved. He wrote it to be true, and that truth, uncomfortable, unflinching, enduring, outlived every ruler who dismissed him. Your solitude can produce the same, not a book perhaps, but a self so integrated, so deliberate, so internally governed, that it does not bend to every social wind. That is the gift hidden inside your loneliness. Take it, and as you leave this moment, carry one final question with you. The next time you are alone, and that familiar ache rises, pause and ask yourself, what if this is not my sentence, but my preparation? The crowd cannot hear what the silence is teaching you, but you can.